Hello, world. My name is Jacob Donn, and you are listening to Talk About It, a show that dives deep into substance abuse and addiction to uncover stories of hope and resilience. Today is August 19th, 2024, and we are going to talk about opioids. An estimated 81,000 Americans died from an opioid overdose in 2023, but a promising new technology aims to reduce that number. Today on Talk About It, I have the privilege of speaking with Muyiwa Oni and Dr. Baston, two developers on the wearable device known as Dove. Gentlemen, Muyiwa Oni and Dr. Baston, it's a great day today, and I'm very excited to actually dive right into this topic of Dove. How are you two doing today? Of
I'm great. So excited to be here, Jacob. Thank you so much for having us on the show.
course. So let's just dive right into this episode. But before I want to do that, I want to give both of you a chance to introduce yourselves. So I guess we can start with Muyiwa. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey in prevention from the beginning until now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I kind of froze a little bit earlier, network issues. But yeah, my name is Muyiwa Oni, CEO of Ultramed. I've been working now with Ultramed for the last 2 years. And my journey in harm reduction and prevention, really started about 4 years ago. But I'm going to kind of take you back to my first realization that the risks of addiction could happen to anyone. In college, I had my first significant injury. I was a soccer player, and I had left the sport for about 2 years, but I still thought I had all the vigor of a full-time player. And in the process, I pulled my groin, very bad injury. I ended up getting prescribed painkillers. And so that was my first interaction with opioids. And I'll tell you, it addressed the pain, and I had some of the best dreams that I can recall. And I mean, I bring it up to say at that time, I actually had a craving for opioids. I was fortunate. I did not refill my prescription, but I do remember that craving. And thereafter, I kind of, this was back in 2008. So before, the opioid epidemic as we know it, I, as this epidemic came to, what we know today, where we're seeing 100,000 plus deaths a year, I realized that, yes, I could have been one of the people who got caught up in that hype, because I have never forgotten that craving I had from the first time. And in fact, I haven't used opioids since that time. So just to say, that realization was something that stuck with me, that this could be anyone. And leaving that now, I've been working with Ultramed on Dove for the last 3 years, and or for the better part of 2 years. But my journey in addiction medicine really started with an interest in, moving. I'm a trained engineer, and I really wanted to do work towards healthcare in terms of developing better health outcomes. I earned my MBA, and I was looking for opportunities to do this in a space like medical devices. So Cameron, whom I've known from for the better part of 20 years now, was involved in this project. And understanding I have an MBA background, this is one of the areas that the team was in need of. And I, at the same time, was looking for a team like Ultramed to kind of do good work. And so, it was kind of a natural fit. And Ultramed, for those that don't know, that name stands for altruism in medicine. This is kind of the formulation. And so I also want to bring that into how we approach the business of developing Dove and serving, addressing this opioid crisis.
I see that. That's excellent. Dr. Baston, if you could please tell us your journey in prevention. I guess especially a little more geared towards medicine, I would assume.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so I'm a pulmonary and critical care physician, which means I work in the intensive care unit. That's the place that people go when an overdose is bad enough that they're suffering from organ failure, or when they're deep enough that they would need a breathing machine in order to keep them alive for a period of time. And so in the last 15 years working as a physician in Seattle and then in Philly, certainly overdose has been a part of the kind of defining characteristic of the illnesses that we see in the ICU. I'll offer that my journey to working on Dove actually is a little more personal, in that my the oldest friend, a woman who I met when I was 2 years old, died of a heroin overdose about 14 years ago now. And at the time, it was not uncommon for someone to show up in a hospital with an overdose, get reversed, and then I remember speaking to the team who was discharging her, and they said, well, we're not going to give her naloxone because we're worried that would encourage her to continue to use. And now in the case of my friend, she ended up dying while using alone. And so with or without Narcan, the outcome would have been the same. But it was such a dramatic demonstration of the fact that the key philosophies of harm reduction, this idea that everyone is a human and deserves to be treated like one, and treating addiction as a disease as opposed to a moral failing, still hadn't penetrated into the medical industry. So a big part of me being a physician has been trying to be a part of that sea change, trying to make sure I have the skill sets to do it. And when the opportunity came to work on this device, I also have a background in engineering. Before I became a physician, I was a mechanical engineer. When the opportunity came to work on this, something that would have potentially allowed someone using alone to stay safe until they were ready to get into the next level of treatment or therapy, it seemed like such an amazing opportunity to feel like I was honoring my friend and her life.
Absolutely. Let's dive right into Dove itself. I kind of hinted at a little bit about what it was. It's a wearable device in the introduction, but what exactly is Dove and how does it contribute to preventing opioid overdoses?
Dove is a wearable sensor. It is a shoulder-mounted device at this moment. What it is we call it a safety belt for folks at risk of opioid toxicity. So if you are if you are someone who is using, you can wear Dove as a way to detect, should you overdose, it would detect the overdose, and then it would alert your chosen care network, whether that was friends and family that you had previously specified, or EMS, if you had indicated that as a preference. So, and again, Cameron, maybe you can refine that, but
yeah, I mean, I really love the analogy of a seatbelt. I think what it comes down to is, in the same way that driving inherently is a dangerous activity, but a seatbelt makes it less likely that you're going to die if something goes wrong. The goal with the Dove device is to try to help people stay alive long enough to get to the next stage in their recovery. And it does this in a multimodal fashion, monitoring the parameters that I would use as a physician to decide whether somebody needed help, and only activating when we're getting to the point where things are getting dangerous. We know from having talked to patients how scared everyone is of a device like this, thinking that something is wrong when it's not. We call that a false positive. All of us can think about how annoying it is when a car alarm is constantly going off, or when another safety feature triggers too easily. And so we want to make sure this is something that both is accurate and able to keep someone safe. You talked about the statistics and how many people die each year. And what we have learned is that more than half of them are alone when that happens. And so while it is important to do things like distribute naloxone to people so that bystanders can help do rescue, a device like this is essential in order to capture that 40 to 50,000 people a year who don't have anyone nearby who could have helped them.
Absolutely. Getting into the specifics of Dove a little bit, when I was doing my background research on Dove and its effectiveness, I noticed that there are several components, and perhaps, this, I'm not sure, because it kind of has to deal with engineering and medicine, but there are several components that deal with measuring blood oxygen, an accelerometer, motion state. When you get into the specifics of Dove, could you elaborate on those different components and the engineering and medical background behind them?
So when we think about opioid toxicity, the way that it causes harm to people is by suppressing the parts of the brain that let you know that you need to breathe. It stops the body from naturally triggering its own breaths. When that happens, the oxygen levels in the blood go down, the carbon dioxide levels in the blood go up. And so pulse oximetry is the term for measuring the oxygen levels in the blood. And we said, hey, we need to figure out a way to do that from a place that's discreet, that's not on your fingertip, prohibiting you from doing the things that you need with your life the way that most pulse oximeters function. We also needed to solve one of the problems with pulse oximeters, which has been in the media recently, which is that they don't function as accurately in patients with different skin tones or different body habits, different weights. And so we needed to figure out how to solve that problem in order to be able to safely measure oxygen levels. And then, as I said, this mechanism of the opioid toxicity, where it suppresses the drive to breathe, means that it slows your breathing down. And you see this in patients who are close to overdosing because their respiratory rate, the number of breaths per minute they take, decreases and decreases and decreases until it gets into a dangerous level. The combination of using oxygen and slowed breathing lets us make sure that we're not going to just get someone who's holding their breath or just get somebody who's moving around and we're not getting an accurate oxygen number. We combine this with a couple of other measures in order to make sure that we're, as much as possible, imitating what I would do if I had a patient in my intensive care unit and then I was monitoring them after an overdose to see when they needed help. And by doing that level of monitoring, combined with accelerometers and the communication of stuff, we've tried to optimize it so that it's a device with a battery life that fits reasonable use. We're talking a battery life measured in days to weeks, not a battery life measured in hours to days like a smartwatch.
I see.
Does that answer your question, Jake?
Yes, absolutely. And it's so, thank you so much for giving us the medical, speaking from a medical standpoint. How does an opioid overdose occur? I guess my next question might be a little more directed towards Muyiwa, but I want to talk about the development of Dove. Where did this idea come from? And having the prototype of having a wearable device, the development of Dove, could you walk us through that?
So we took a co-design approach, that is designing with the community we are serving. And that is to say we went out and we partnered with organizations, and our company is based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We partnered with groups such as Prevention Point Philadelphia, Savage Sisters. These are groups that are serving directly the community, many peer support staff, people with lived experience. And we worked with them to interview people who use opioids and to develop some understanding around what was preferred in a device that would do what we were describing, that is sense and detect and overdose, alert first responders, and potentially inject the life-saving antidote to an opioid overdose, which is naloxone. And in the course of that, we had a 100-person, validated study where it was, we had participants give us feedback, and we used that to inform the design of our first Dove device. So we had several different iterations that we presented to this group. We had an wrist watch, a finger, a ring-based oximeter solution, as well as an ankle and thigh and shoulder strap. And we found that this formulation of Dove, or rather this, shoulder-mounted form factor, yes. The shoulder-mounted device was the one that was most acceptable in terms of meeting the need of being concealable, being not limiting the use of your hands. And we found this form factor to be the most accommodating of the needs of this population. And so that's kind of how we arrived at a shoulder-mounted Dove device.
I see. And in that same vein of development, Muyiwa, since you were the CEO of OutRmed, and then I'll get to Dr. Baston. But Muyiwa, what was the biggest challenge you encountered during development?
Great question. In fact, these challenges continue. So development is an ongoing process. And in our case, we have done studies since that first study I was just describing, where in our later studies, we had kind of real world study where folks were wearing our device and wearing it for 5 to 7 days. And in the course of that, we were finding that in real world use, but prior to that, a lot of our studies were in kind of controlled settings. They were in clinical settings. And so in real world use, our prototypes were not robust enough. They were breaking. They would break after 3 days, or there would be a battery drain challenge where while our battery capacity we thought was sufficient, we were finding, we don't know whether it was because of heat or but the real world conditions, our device wasn't lasting as long as we anticipated. So we have since, gone through several iterations. It was a very instructive experience, these real world studies, and we continue to do them because they help us iterate and improve the device with especially the people that we are serving. So we continue to use the co-design approach, and some of the challenges include, developing, taking it from the clinical setting into a real world setting.
I see. Dr. Baston, I want to get your perspective on this next question, which has to do with the future of Dove. When it comes to development and engineering, but especially from the medical perspective, what are your plans for the future of Dove? Perhaps are you going to get, better, more advanced medical readings? From your perspective in medicine, what's the future of Dove?
That's a great question. It's so funny. We, when we were first drawing this thing up on a napkin, the thing we drew is actually what I think of as the future state, the end state. The place we want to get to is, I think analogous to a device that's become more familiar to most people, which is that, if you look at a lot of exercise focused people, they have these continuous glucose monitors on their arm that are tracking their blood sugar levels over time. And these things, because of a recent development, are able to talk directly to an insulin pump, so that patients with diabetes no longer have to get a reading, poke themselves in the finger, see whether they're safe or not. If they're at an elevated level, get some insulin and inject themselves. It's become a closed loop system. And that's the place that I really want to get this to, is a device that operates independently of a cell phone, a home, and monitors continuously, alerts you when it's worried, alerts your friend or emergency response if it's really worried, and then uses titratable amounts of naloxone or whatever antidote is necessary based on the prevalence of whatever drugs are out at that time to slowly bring people into a safe range. And to me, the win here is that if you talk to anyone who has had an overdose and who's received naloxone, it is a truly unpleasant experience. Vomiting, all the symptoms of withdrawal happening all at the same time. And trying to make Dove smart enough to avoid reversing people when they don't need it. And then when it does reverse people, doing it in a gentle enough way that it's not creating that sense of suffering. That would be the win. Once we get to that place, to me, there are so many applications for this. Without the naloxone, I could use this to monitor people with any sort of pulmonary disease, any sort of lung disease that needs continuous monitoring. I can think about patients who have just had a surgery and they're getting a lot of pain medicines, as with Muyiwa's story, and they have other medical comorbidities that put them at high risk of overdose. And I could see this being part of the overall life cycle of getting people into MAT and through the recovery path, having this be, as we talked about, the seatbelt that keeps them safe as they're driving on that road. So, sorry, I ramble a little bit, but I just have so many places that I could use this once we get it ready to put into people's hands.
That's excellent. Well, I want to get your perspective, I guess, coming from the more business and engineering fields. What is your vision for Dove? In the future, do you see a world where people who are at risk of opioid overdoses are wearing this product that you invented, that you and your team invented, called Dove? What's your vision for this product?
Fantastic question. And I think a lot about the organization that Dove would, enable. We talk a lot about community is really at the center of what helps healing, and Dove is a tool. We're really developing a really helpful tool for harm reductionists to help folks reduce the risk of overdose. We want for those folks who are using, we want them to use in a safer manner. For those folks on their recovery journey, we want to present, again, a seatbelt to, and when I think about the future for Dove, I think a lot about what is the community that we're going to support and facilitate. And so I also think about how we, different, like, I'll step back a little bit and talk again about the name of our company, Ultramed. So altruism in medicine. Our goal is to get Dove to the folks that need it. We are not driven by the profit motive. And we want to extend that idea with Dove. How do we kind of and I've talked with Cameron about this, but how do we kind of companies in our space, in the pharmaceutical space, in the medical device space, many of them are profit driven. And so, and in fact, I'll tell you one challenge we've had in terms of pursuing an auto injector is there is a large cost to develop an auto injector. It can cost millions of dollars to develop an auto injector. In our case, in like, you can get a range between, let's say, 30 million and, hundreds of millions to develop an auto injector. And what that means for a business is that puts a lot of pressure in terms of how do you get funding and where your funding comes from. If your funding is coming from venture capital, that'll also put a lot of pressure to get return on investment. And we want to build a company that isn't driven by like profit, like financial profit as much as it is by human impact, And so the short answer is I think about how do we build a company like that, and with Dove.
That's great. Yeah. Muyiwa, thank you so much. And of course, Dr. Baston. Actually, before coming on to this podcast, I did not know about Dove, but now me and everyone listening has the knowledge they need to learn about Dove. I'd like to ask one final question for this interview. I'll start with Dr. Baston. and then I'll talk to Muyiwa. When it comes to this opioid epidemic, which has taken the lives of tens of thousands of Americans per year, and over the course of several years, hundreds of thousands, it's a serious crisis. So, Dr. Baston, starting with you, whether it's involving Dove or whether it doesn't involve Dove, in your personal opinion, what needs to be done to curb opioid overdoses and bring about a world that is safe from the threat of and the risks of opioids?
Thanks. I love the optimism in this because it just demonstrates that we are thinking about how do we change? How do we bend the curve, and then how do we get back to where we want to be? And I think that podcasts like yours are a part of it, because for so long, and we've seen this with so many things, with alcoholism, with addiction in general. For so long, the moral and shame forces and the way we view these things in society prohibited us from even thinking about solutions that worked. They prevent us from researching, from developing techniques, and they prevent people from seeking help. For so long, doctors were very much a part of the problem, as we refused to kind of acknowledge the early signals that the pain control methodologies that we were taught in medical school were causing more problems than they were solving. And so I think you've already seen a huge effort about both education of physicians and structured regulations around how we get people exposed to opioids to begin with. But I think the biggest thing is changing the way we're looking at the disease of addiction in general, and really separating our perception of this as being a willpower-driven problem, and making sure that we're thinking about this in the same way that we would another disease, something that requires treatment, something that can be prevented, something that for some people have increased risk of developing, and for whom we can help rescue them before the problem starts. And I think that those sort of changes at a societal level are so important. And then, as Muyiwa said, when it comes to the things that we see that really work, they are going to be community-based. And so I hope that the project that we're working on, this device, is a part of what keeps people safe and alive long enough to see the real important, larger scale changes happen.
Absolutely. That's such a beautiful vision. Muyiwa, in your opinion, I guess speaking a little bit more from an engineering or business perspective, like I said before, whether it involves Dove or whether it doesn't, what needs to be done to curb this opioid epidemic?
So similarly, I think projects like yours are excellent. As in terms of education, I think education is key. This is one of the, this is, I think, the most important tool in our arsenal to make change. And more from an engineering and business perspective, we are I think also educating on how businesses need to be different to meet these kind of challenges. Like, and this kind of also ties into the thread I was speaking on earlier, but exploring different approaches to building business models, such that they are more community focused towards the well-being of more than the, if you will, like financial principles of a business. And so that from the business aspect, and education, and a focus on a reduction around the stigma, which I think Cameron was also speaking to.
Yeah. Muyiwa, thank you so much. Muyiwa Oni and Dr. Cameron Baston, thank you so much for all the knowledge and wisdom you provided on this incredible device called Dove. And I have no doubt that projects like Dove and hopefully will of course continue to evolve and improve and perhaps inspire a new generation of devices like it or similar to it to help curb this opioid epidemic. For our viewers at home, that was Dr. Cameron Baston, the medical lead on the Dove device, as well as Muyiwa Oni, the CEO of OutYourMed, two individuals on the team responsible for developing this awesome device called Dove. My name is Jacob Donn, and we'll see you next time on Talk About It.